Yeah.
Paranoid schizophrenia and delusional disorder, I mean, usually, especially schizophrenia, starts at an early age. I mean, by 16, 17, 18, 19, or 20, I mean, usually those people, kind of turn out. I mean, they were people who were never kind of right to begin with. But most of the victims that I've worked with, usually this starts to happen to them in their late 30s, early 40s, long past, any time that, they would have been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Most of them have been functioning successfully, a lot of them as professionals of one type or another. And they can pinpoint the day that they noticed the stalking and that they started hearing voices or being attacked with directed energy. So, I mean, they're pretty knowledgeable about it, and that's one of the ways that you can discriminate between who's mentally ill and who's probably a victim. But then you also have the victims that have been victimized so badly that they probably have been driven a little bit crazy. So it's a real fine line when you're working with some of these people. But the big discriminator is those that have been forced into seeing psychiatrists and put on medications. The medications don't work. Even with severe schizophrenia, the medication usually clears up the problem. Not with this targeting. It doesn't matter what medications they put you on. You're still going to be targeted. And I've seen that with a number of victims that have been forced into treatment for mental disorder, and put on a myriad of drugs that typically would help schizophrenia, but won't help with this type of targeting because it's targeting. So, but as far as police involvement goes, I have a pretty good working relationship with the police department here. And a lot of them know me, and a lot of them do believe this. And believe it or not, for the first time I've ever heard, there was a local victim here in San Antonio that called the police and was complaining about electronic disturbances in her home. And, the stuff that these victims typically see, the computer coming off and on its own, the lights blinking off and on their own, garage doors opening and closing on their own. And I was surprised. The cop that came out to take the complaint actually told her that it sounded to him like she was under electronic harassment. So, and that kind of brought a big smile to my face because it means that our educational efforts are actually getting out there. And in a recent development, I am actually working right now with a township in California who's had enough complaints to their police department that they finally reached out. They now know that this isn't just a bunch of crazy people, that there is something going on. And they've actually reached out to me and ISAAC to develop a system where they have a place to refer these people, to talk to us, either to get scanned or to get coping advice with electronic harassment, rather than just automatically rope them into what California calls a 5150, or a detainment due to mental disorder. So, I mean, we're making some strides, and that's really, in my mind, where we need to make strides is in educational efforts, getting law enforcement educated, getting psychiatric professionals educated, that there are technologies out there that can put voices in your head. That for someone just to complain about hearing voices or complain about stalking isn't necessarily a turnkey diagnosis of mental disorder anymore. I mean, there's multiple technologies that will put voices in your head. So hearing voices alone does not automatically, send you down the pathway to a diagnosis of schizophrenia.
Well, when this first took place up in New Hampshire, I went to get some help, and the psychologist asked me if I was hearing voices, and I said no, and she got angry at me. And I said, no, I'm not. And I didn't understand at the time. It's always easier to look back at all these events and then understand them after the fact. But I couldn't believe why this woman was so angry at me, because I really wasn't hearing voices. And then when I told her that somebody told me, a business owner up there in North Conway, New Hampshire, told me that the government is involved with this. I said it to the woman, and she turned on me like you wouldn't believe, and that was it. And they wouldn't see me anymore. They wouldn't help me, and unless I told her who told me that. And I would not give up the name because there was some sort of gag order issued. And are you aware of gag orders being issued also, John?
Well, I mean, I know they do that with national security letters. I mean, if you're under an official investigation with a letter, there are gag orders that are listed where, like if they send an order to AT&T to get your phone records and, or to your doctor to get your medical records, they are not supposed to tell you that those records have been asked for. As far as gag orders among the perpetrators who are doing this kind of stuff, it's hard to say. But, my advice to most victims is if you can avoid being sent to a psychiatrist, you're in better hands. Because the sad thing is with psychiatry and psychology, is most of these technologies were initially studied through MK Ultra and MK Search back in the 60s and 70s, and almost all of those programs were headed up by psychiatrists and psychologists. Ewan Cameron, as a matter of fact, was not only the president of the American Psychiatric Association, but he was the president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association as well, and was probably one of the most notorious MK Ultra researchers. So, I mean, there's no mistake that this is designed to mimic mental illness. So, and the sad part is most of the community-based psychiatrists that you'll be sent to, they don't even know the history of their own field of medicine. So, their interest lies in giving you a diagnosis, roping you within the DSM-4 or now 5 to diagnose you with something so they can put you on a medication and bring you in for monthly visits. So, I don't care how much research you've done online, you're probably not going to convince most psychiatrists that this is happening to you and that it's real. I mean, there's a handful of psychiatrists who know about it in this country, but by and large, most of them are just there to give you a diagnosis. So,
John, in my hand, I'm looking at a letter that you had written, and it starts out. It's May 15th, 2014. I'm sure you're aware of this, and it's I believe you wrote it to the medical community, possibly to whom it may concern. I am writing you on the behalf of victims of both in the United States and abroad. As you are aware, many revelations surrounding the National Security Agency's extensive electronic dragnet have recently come to light through released records by the intelligence insider, Mr. Edward Snowden. During the course, blah, 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 but you talked about the NSA privacy, but then you went in talking about electronic weapons. You know what I'm talking about with this letter, correct?
Yeah. Actually, that letter, I was asked to submit a letter by the World Health Organization against torture. Actually, the ball is rolling in Europe against this technology further than it has here. There's a lot of Europeans being victimized by this technology. They actually have their own separate organizations similar to ISA Act and similar to Freedom from Covert Surveillance and Harassment. As a matter of fact, they're having an electronic harassment conference later on this month where they have a number of really great speakers, and I'll be doing a pre-recorded video for that conference. Melanie Verschaan is one of the women who works with the European Union group, and she got this, at least got an audience to some of the higher-ups with the World Health Organization against torture, who wanted a letter from me just kind of briefly describing what we're seeing here to get it into the Libby Committee, L-I-B-E Committee, that's part of the European Parliament, where they've been investigating some of the abuses by the NSA. As far as, email targeting and cell phone targeting, all that came to light after the German chancellor found out that her cell phone was being tapped by the NSA. So they started having hearings and started having some of the NSA whistleblowers come forward there to talk about full spectrum surveillance and how their computers are being hacked and their cell phones are being hacked. So the natural next progression to that was to, rope in, biosurveillance or biocyber communications type weapons, like we're dealing with, into the live committee. So that was the kind of the impetus for that letter, was to get this topic included into the Libby Committee in European Parliament.
Now, when I read this, I thought this would be a useful letter, like if somebody was to see a doctor and so forth, and the doctor was somewhat believing what they're going through, and I just, when I read it, I thought, what a great tool that you've put out there for.
Well, and you know what? I imagine some people probably have tried to use it that way. Believe it or not, that letter was never meant to go public. That letter was actually written privately to the World Health Organization, but someone released it online and it went viral pretty quick.
I would say so.
Yeah, but that there are more and more doctors that are starting to realize that something's going on. And I'll tell you, from a physician standpoint, if you see, one person a year that's voicing these complaints, it's pretty easy to write that one person off as crazy. But if you're like me, where you're really seeing how vast and the numbers of people that really are being targeted, then it's pretty easy for most of us with a scientific background to say, wait a minute, I got 60 people in California that are all hearing the same voice. They're not hearing multiple voices. There's 60 men in Palm Springs, California, all being attacked and all hearing the same voice, the voice of a woman named Lisa. That just defies the odds of delusional disorder. And at that point, your scientific mind would kick in and go, okay, something's going on. This looks like experimentation. And I think most physicians would come to that conclusion. But, the victimization is so scattered out nationwide, where you have a handful of victims in every city, all seeing different doctors. So no one physician is seeing a multitude of patients coming in with these complaints. Or they're being referred over to a psychiatrist who does see a multitude of people hearing voices, most of whom are schizophrenic. So that doctor is going to lean more towards what he's used to dealing with, which is mental illness. But, the letter was actually never meant to be a burden of proof for victims, but was really written as a confidential letter. But, it wasn't weeks later. It was being emailed right back to me by victims. So, the letter did work, though, and on a brighter note, it looks like all of this probably is going to be included into committee hearings in the European Union. So at least if they can start the ball rolling against having some legislator against this or having some exposure of the technology, then maybe our government would be forced to follow suit.
Now, what have you found as far as, I think you mentioned this in the very beginning, and this is something I tried asking the NSA guys, all three of them, Bill Binney, Thomas Drake, Kurt Wiebe. How do I protect myself from this stuff when they keep shocking me in the testicles and everything else, and it's obviously stressful, and is there a way to protect yourself, or we're just guinea pigs and that's it? Suck it up.
Well, I'll tell you, the brain manipulating part of it, there's some methods of protecting yourself from that. And what we found is that if you use a binaural beat program at night and resynchronize the EEG, that it makes the targeting a little harder to do. And if you can limit the targeting, which is the way they're actually accessing your location, then certainly it's a lot harder for them to attack you with any directed energy weapons. As far as protection from directed energy weapons themselves, I don't think even our military has any substantial protection mechanisms in place, because it was about 2 years ago that there was a call for scientific abstracts out to the private sector for any companies that may have any intuition or already be working on any type of protective barriers to actually shield from this. And, as you know, certain radio frequencies you can shield out with, copper screening and things like that, and some you can't. And extremely low frequency waves are one of them that you can't. They're hard to shield. They actually pass through the earth. And scalar waves are another one that are hard to shield. So there are some elements of the electromagnetic spectrum that can be shielded with normal shielding materials, and some that even our government is looking for ways to shield themselves from. So I think the bottom line is this technology expanded so quickly, kind of like technology in general always ramps up at a faster rate than our legal system ramps up to handle the new complaints and the new laws that are going to be broken. And I think this technology accelerated at a rate where even our government and our military doesn't have a way to protect themselves from their own weapons. At least, I would gather that based on their request for abstracts.
Now, John, I'm just going to show the viewers real quick. There's a House bill which was passed in the state of New Hampshire, and it was brought to attention the summer of 2008, 2007 session when I was going through with what I went through, and I don't think they had any laws to enforce the law to protect me. But I'm gonna just real quick flash this up. This is the bottom part of the bill. There was 3 parts. One talked about remotely readable devices in consumer products. Part 2 prohibits the human implantation of a remotely readable device without the individual's informed written consent. And then Part 3 prohibits electronic tracking of another individual. And thanks, Reg. So basically, in this bill, John, so they now have laws in New Hampshire about electronic tracking of another individual, and believe it or not, the human implantation of a remotely readable device. It says right here, in the following pages, remotely readable device means any item, application, or mark that is passively or actively capable of transmitting an individual's identity, characteristics, status, group membership, travel history, location, so forth. It goes on and on. But they actually referred to it as an application or a mark. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
No, and that's because RFID comes in all kind of different forms. There's even RFID paint, RFID decals. I mean that will, when stimulated by a stimulator, will actually, give off a reading. I kind of went over that at my lecture at the Super Soldier Summit. That, for the most part, we're all relatively tracked now. There's RFIDs in just about all of your clothing. A lot of medical devices now that are implantable, like the artificial hips and artificial knees, actually have RFID. And with the appropriate scanner, you can actually put together, what someone does all day long just by knowing when they walk in and out of a Walmart or when they walk in and out of a Starbucks or anywhere they may walk by where a scanner is available that picks up on their location. So, and that law, actually, New Hampshire was based on the first law that was passed against implantation, which was in Missouri. And that law got passed after Dr. Terry Robertson, another physician activist against this, and myself met with Representative Jim Guest, at the time was a state legislator in Missouri. And we met with him over 2 days, over a weekend in Missouri, and went over all the history of how this came to be, the history of MK Ultra, current research being done, and current victim status as far as people complaining about this. And over 2 days made a believer out of him, and he did get the first law against human implantation passed in Missouri. And then several other states kind of followed suit and passed it, probably secondary to victims' complaints in those states. And then after legislators started to actually look at the technology and look at the research being done on the technology. And that also, which by the way is one of the reasons I think that a lot of this is being done without a chip, is for the most part this country is still a Judeo-Christian country, and most people aren't going to willingly take an implanted chip. So, and I think the government came to that conclusion pretty quickly and started looking for ways to do this where a chip is not required. And that would make a lot more sense, because a lot of the victims I've spoke with, they don't have any lost time. They haven't been drugged. They haven't woken up with an injection site. And we scan them, and they're positive for radio frequency transmissions coming in and out of them, but they're not positive on any type of imaging, for an implant. And I know a lot of people, when they hear me say that, will say, well, then it's nanotechnology. It must be nano, because you can't find nano on an X-ray or an MRI. Well, nano is a pretty recent thing, and that wouldn't explain the people that are complaining about victimization from, 10, 15, and 20 years ago. And a lot of the victims I've worked with, will tell you that they kind of first started noticing this, in the 90s. And I don't think nanotechnology was at a stage where it would have been used that prolifically back then. So, and that's why I think myself and Dr. Robert Duncan, who actually worked on some of this technology for the CIA, and Jose Delgado he was an MK Ultra researcher. Before he died, he said that implantation wasn't necessary, that everything he did with implantation can now be done with broadcasting. So, I think the laws came a little too late, and like you said, how do you enforce it?
It's, to me, I have warned our viewers to keep their bedrooms clean and clear of all electronic devices, especially with the NSA guests we had on. But, your phones, your laptops, everything, keep your bedroom electronic free, and at least try to have one part of the house where that nobody can hear what's going on. And, part of the stalking issue is also what they're, like you said, what they're listening to and everything. And I've after a while, you just ignore it, and it doesn't bother me at all. But I know in the beginning it was very, very disturbing, and so forth. Now, we only got like 4 minutes left, John. And Wally walks off the set. He's strange like that. So I think he's under mind control. He is.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned the NSA has some really new novel stuff that's worth a quick mention. And the main one is called continuous wave radar. And the way they actually monitor your computers now is the computers and the cell phones and stuff we get now are interdicted prior to us purchasing them. They're already preloaded with the hardware to monitor them. And the way they do it is they bombard it with continuous wave radar, and the chip within the computer actually transmits your data to a receiving station. So, and I don't know if you've seen recently, there's been a lot of fake cell phone towers that have been identified in the United States that no one is claiming. The NSA says it's not theirs, which I'm not so sure I believe. The phone companies say they're not theirs, but they do pick up the data off your cell phone when you drive by them. So, right now we're under full spectrum surveillance, and it's going to take political change to help it.
Yeah, I forgot what NSA whistleblower it was. If it was Thomas Drake, got into the towers, talking about the towers and everything, the cell phone towers. So it was really, really interesting. We're down to like 2 minutes. I have a quick question. I have a guest sitting off to the side. Her name is Sam. She's also a targeted individual. She's going to be on this show, in a couple weeks or so, for people to hear her story. But she has a question. Have you interviewed many military veterans who have been victimized by these covert technologies? If so, Do their experiences differ much from civilian victims?
No, their experiences are about the same. And yes, I've interviewed a number of military victims, and I'm currently working with a naval employee that actually worked at the Navy Yard with Aaron Alexis, who is actually trying to get a suit together against the Navy, along with several other Navy guys that feel like they've been implanted. So don't think that the government doesn't target its own. Yeah, they do. And certainly when you're in the military, once you sign on that line, there's a reason they call you a GI, you're government issue. You're no longer a human being. You're a commodity, just like a tank or a pair of pliers.
Well, that is certainly her situation. She'll be on as in a future as a future guest. We have like less than a minute left, John. I want to thank you for taking the time coming on. And do you think we can have you on again?
Sure, be glad to have on.
Great.
I'll be back on with you. And remember, Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control, should be out by the new year. So,
all right. Well, we're starting to fade out. Great. Thank you, John.
All right.
Thank you, John, for calling.
Have a good night.
We'll see you, Phil.
Yep. All right. Good night, everyone. God bless all the viewers. God bless America.
And wake up, America.
And wake up, America. And when you hear the joke about a tinfoil hat wearing people, I don't think it's much of a joke anymore. You might consider. I have no idea. So don't know what's coming on next week. Something good will be here. Right, Wally?
Well, you and I will be here.
We'll be here. So
that's good.
That's it. Have a great night, everyone. Good night.
Wake up, America.
Wake up.